For the month of December, I had initially resolved to look at the Capcom 5, a set of GameCube titles made by, well, obviously Capcom, numbering 4 total. And that's not a joke, it's actually because Dead Phoenix, one of the games that was part of the lineup, was cancelled before it was ever realized. However, 2 of these games also include Resident Evil 4 and Killer 7. And seriously, do I need to review Resident Evil 4, the game that set the bar for third-person over-the-shoulder shooters moving into the modern era? Yeah, no. So instead for this month, we'll be looking at some of Capcom's underloved franchises, including some of the Capcom 5 titles, and some that are technically not part of that bundle. Why? Because, well, mostly because I really want to see these games in Teppen, but that's neither here nor there. Let's start in chronological order. So we'll be looking at the only one of the 4 Capcom 5 games that actually remained GameCube exclusive. Join me for a closer look at PN03. Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snek, and today we'll be looking at the obscure 2003 GameCube exclusive PN03. How's this for a recipe? Capcom had had a rough fiscal year prior and thus wanted to get PN03 to the market as quickly as possible, so they operated on a very tight timeline. Then on top of that, they had to work on a very small budget. And then they shoved Shinji Mikami to head the project because that will totally balance out the above. Doesn't take too much imagination to parse why this game isn't one of Capcom's dearly beloved big franchises now, does it? A lot of things just had to take a back seat, not the least of which was the story. As for what that is, a hired mercenary robot killer, Vanessa Z. Schneider, drops down on a colonized planet that's being overrun with robots due to a berserk system called CAMS, the Computerized Armament Management System, all at the behest of a mysterious, anonymous client. A client who also knows more than they let on, mentioning that this could be viewed as a personal mission as well, as these same berserk robots were the same sort that killed Vanessa's parents, who quickly brushes it off as coincidental and unimportant. Thus, the game begins. Graphically, the game has great textures and designs. Vanessa herself makes for an attractive and agile heroine, nimbly dodging around the variety of missiles and lasers you'll need to contend with. And the robot enemies look pretty cool too. The textures themselves are great. Problem is, the variety leaves something to be desired. Put another way, the game has 11 levels. Which one was my favorite? Well, you could say I'm torn between the desert, the white sterile corridor that comes after a desert segment, or the white sterile corridor which has a desert segment in the middle of it. They all left such a huge impact on me, especially as 9 of them start in virtually identical starting rooms. Not only is the game incredibly short, able to be beaten in 3 or 4 hours, but the levels can very quickly become repetitious. Especially as 2 of the later game levels had the client queue up near-identical dialogue about having new access to locked rooms from previous levels, meaning that you'll just go through prologue segments of levels that are the same, but with slight modifications to enemy placement. The actual environments themselves do look good. The deserts look like broad, sweeping deserts, and the corridors certainly look futuristic and high-tech. The problem is they lack interactivity and variety. I mean, seriously, you transition between rooms in identical fashion to Spooky's jump scare mansion. I'm not even joking. Because the hallways have to allow you to dodge incoming damage, they're all shaped with various structurally superfluous bends and nooks in them for you to dodge into. But even that fails to give them any real personality. On the other hand, the main character herself is easy on the eyes. Not only did a lot of effort go into hand-drawing her animations, meaning there was no use of motion capture, but she maintains a strong sense of kinetic grace and visual appeal. She'd look right at home alongside the likes of Dante and Bayonetta. Since she fires directly from the hands of her Aegis armored suit, she points her hand and flicks her fingers into various positions to fire. This is even true for button mashing for maximum fire speed, as this is that sort of game where manual firing can put out more damage than relying on the inbuilt auto-fire, even when that stat is maxed out. She'll even shift positions when one target dies and she pursues another. Vanessa also has an animation quirk where she constantly either hears the background music or just always has a song stuck in her head. She's always bobbing along with it, tapping her foot, and moving along to the rhythm in one fashion or another. So even if the environs are dull, the heroine herself keeps the game interesting enough. Speaking of the music, the soundtrack in this game is pretty good. I mean, it's a Capcom game, I'd be shocked if it weren't. While only one particular track really stood out to me, the rock techno fusion the game has going on works for the always moving forward design of the levels and felt appropriate to Smash Robots too. Special mention belonging to Dancing Queen, the in-credit instrumental, as the must-listen banger of the OST, emphasizing a sort of drum and bass that highlights many of the game's tracks. Oh, and I heard some of these tracks got remixed for Resident Evil 4's soundtrack. Anyone in the comments want to confirm or deny that for me? Well, anyway, that's really all there is to it. The sound effects serve mostly as warning due to the enemy's tendency to only warp in once Vanessa is in proximity, and some larger enemies having a wind-up whirl that audibly warns you that a nigh insta-kill laser is coming your direction and that you should be seeking cover. That's the sound design in a nutshell, really. And mechanically, the game is largely linear, level-based action platformer shooter. In more words, you control Vanessa as she proceeds through the game and shoot everything that moves and a few things that don't. The level happens in linear fashion, built of smaller rooms which proceed in equally linear fashion in some number. The main 11 missions are set in their configuration, I believe, but the optional trials, the best moneymakers in the game, are randomly configured. Or at least they seem that way to me. But as said, given the repetitious nature of the graphical design, that could literally be me just going crazy and not knowing any better. Each room has a simple set of uniform goals you will be judged upon at the room's completion. Time spent within it, enemies destroyed, damage taken being the most significant, with extra bonuses applied to fully clearing a room of its enemies and doing so without taking a single hit. Since the entire room was loaded in at once, Vanessa's shots travel until they hit something. This can make some configurations very simple and others very infuriating. The reason for this are legion, but chief among them is the absolute utter garbage camera controls. The camera will gradually turn if you turn Vanessa by walking straight and gradually veering, but this is slow and unwieldy. You can lean the camera a certain direction with the C-stick, but it will only ever go one step in any direction, and never further than that. You can even use the Z button to do an on-the-dime 180-degree turn to check behind you, which is situationally useful, but smooth turns or even a hard 90-degree turn are the stuff of dreams here, as you simply don't have a means to do so. This is pretty annoying as most of the gameplay will happen in hallways, and some enemies will try to flank you on the sides of your character. Vanessa doesn't quite have tank controls, but it's just a hair off away from them, which makes her turning radius wider than it needs to be. The theoretically handy backstep dodge performed by tapping down on the control stick is actually much less useful in practice than just having full range of movement the way Mario or Sonic do in a 3D space. Jumping, however, is actually quite intuitive. Vanessa really only has one measurement for her jump, and it's pretty much the only one she'll ever need, as the platforming in the game is based around said measurement, so there's little guesswork ever involved and it resolves quickly. And as memory serves, there were really only maybe 3 or 4 instances where the platforming got in any way significantly complicated, meaning there was little inhibiting me from constantly just pressing forward. The shoulder buttons act as a quick step dodge, but you maintain your hitbox while you're using them, so if you're hit mid-dodge, you'll still take the damage. So only dodge if you really mean to dodge and not just hoping for invincibility frames that never come. Further, you can crouch for some fan service, a little added cover when the odd low wall shows up, and tuck and roll underneath security lasers that don't run to floor height. Apart from that, you're just supposed to light up enemy robots with your blast from your Aegis suit. Oh yeah, let's talk about that next. Between missions and at certain checkpoints, you can find a handy store where you can purchase continues, or lives really, additional armored suits and their respective power-ups. These will be expensive at first, but you'll probably find one that you like and start powering it up enough to remain competitive the entire way through the story. Each set has an average suit, one that emphasizes attack but has lower defense, and one that has a strong defense with lower damage per shot. I tended towards the defensive versions of the suit since I'm not quite good enough to get no damage bonuses in every single room just yet, but despite the clunky controls and the omnipresent frustration that was the inability to move and fire at the same time, I soon found myself adapting to how the game handled well enough to get consistently good ranks across each level. I even did well enough to unlock the Super Mode armor, which has the max values for all stats when upgraded to full, which you can take with you on subsequent New Game Plus runs of the game. And yes, there's a New Game Plus mode and 3 levels of difficulty to unlock and experience. All told, if you want to go for 100% completion, you'll be looking at a package that sold for budget price when it was new, and will run you some 20-odd hours, which isn't bad. Now, this is where I normally do a what could they improve upon segment, but I think I hit everything already. Better levels and themes, ability to move and shoot at the same time, and maybe a bit more robust story. Oh yeah, and there's only 3 bosses in the game, all of which get reused entirely too much. One to the point of comedic absurdity as it ends up gaining an additional form every time you encounter it. So let's take a moment and go into a small spoiler segment instead, where I can mention a few things real quick. If you don't want to hear them, jump ahead to the timestamp listed on screen now, and I'll give you a minute to make up your minds. Good? Okay. The title of the game seems really out of place. Product number 3. Well, in the course of the game's story, you'll see a woman in a vat who looks just like Vanessa, implying that cloning shenanigans are afoot. And due to a self-destruct sequence, you don't have the time to really pontificate upon this, and are forced to abandon her to her fate. And in the endgame sequence, you see the client is a woman identical to Vanessa. Vanessa will then ask who the clone really is, and the client admits that even she doesn't know, as her memories could have been faked as well. So it's altogether likely that either the client or Vanessa herself is the titular number 3, the third in a series of clones, all of whom are subject to puppeteering by some greater force, who muddles their ability to fight back with false memory implants. And yes, before anyone even asks, there is a quote-unquote shower ending, obtained by beating the game with a challenge suit that gives you the lowest health bar in the game on the highest difficulty and obtaining the highest average ranking. However, it isn't really what you might think. It simply shows zoom-ins on Vanessa and the client's faces, and Vanessa mentions offhandedly that she shouldn't be calling her while she's in the shower. More important than titillation, we learn the client's actual name is Dominique Z. Schneider, implying greater depths to this clone story. Alright, spoiler alert over now. In the end, PNO3 is a game that got panned pretty harshly in its debut, and it is a very flawed game. But in my time playing it, I found myself enjoying it. In what was going to be just a playtest to learn more about the game, I ended up doing a complete run of the main campaign just because I wanted to see it through. While a lot of the criticisms it harbors are valid, there really is a pretty alright title underneath all that. If Capcom announced tomorrow there was to be a sequel or an HD remake of the game, I'd be legitimately excited at the prospect. So alright Capcom, Vanessa and Teppen win. This has been the Snek number 1, bringing today this forgotten GameCube gem. If you liked today's episode, hit the like button so I know. Leave a comment down below telling me if you've ever played this game, or if you were even aware of its existence. I'd be curious to see. And you can get more from me over the Tomodachi Bros podcast, where we talk anime, movies, and more. You can hit the subscribe and bell icons too, so you'll never miss a one right here on the Hipster Snek channel. And join me here each week from our obscure reviews, indie excellence, and more. And I will see you there.